of international sports politics for the past, let's say 2 years or so. Everyone is aware of the fact that ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, they have become a pariah in international sports. They've been thrown out by the likes of the IOC, FIFA, UEFA, and every other person. But now the question is, are there double standards for the international sporting organizations? There are those who are also pointing fingers at Israel and their depredations on the Palestinians in Gaza. Over 35,000 people have been killed in Gaza during the conflict, but despite that, Israel still maintains a place in all these bodies that I mentioned. They will be participating at the Olympics coming up in Paris in just a few weeks. And if they had qualified, they will have participated at the European Championships as well. Israeli clubs will also definitely participate in UEFA club competitions as well. So the question is this a case of Animal Farm, where some animals are more equal than others, or there's a separate laws for the Russians and a different one for the Israelis? Well, joining us tonight is an expert on this particular topic. I'm talking about Professor Simon Chadwick. He's a professor of sport and geopolitical economy with the SKEMA Business School in Paris. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Professor. This is a topic that has been on the front burner for quite a while. The question really is, let me start with this way. Is it true that there is a different set of rules for Russia and a different set of rules for Israel?
That's a good question, and the simple answer is we don't know, and that is the issue. Because to talk about the moral equivalence, you know, is Russia worse than Israel? Is Israel worse than Russia? It's a kind of false debate in some respects, because what we don't have in the rules and regulations in the system of governance that exists in organizations like the IOC, in UEFA and others, is a clear and well-established policy on what happens to a country when it engages in a particular form of action. So obviously we've got Russia and Israel as the two cases that you're talking about. But keep in mind, for example, over the last 2 months in the run-up to the Mexican elections, 37 prospective members of parliament from Mexico have been shot dead. Now, the question is, should FIFA be considering whether Mexico is a fit host for the 2026 World Cup? There's been no debate about that. I'm guessing that most people in Nigeria, in fact, most people in Europe, probably don't even know about what's happening in Mexico right now. So I think there is something about, yes, there is something that what appears to be double standards, but the reason that we have these kind of juxtapositions and contradictions and apparent conflicts is because sports governing bodies don't have governance systems and policies in place to deal with these kinds of things. And as a consequence of that, you get these kind of knee-jerk reactions where action is taken in one case and in not another. And if we expect as fans, as academics, as media commentators, if we expect the likes of the IOC and FIFA and others to be arbiters of geopolitical actions or of military conflict or of breaches of human rights or whatever else it might be, you know, if that's what we're going to expect of our sports governing bodies, then I think our sports governing bodies do need to reflect upon who they are, what they do, what kind of actions they take. Because I think what your original question really highlighted is the kind of inconsistency that we're seeing, not just in the case of Russia, Israel, but I think across international sport in general.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Mexico. It is regarded as, I mean, one of the most dangerous countries in the world. We've had a long-running battle with drug cartels, especially in the states of Jalisco as well. So, but there are those who argue that those are internal security issues. Long-running, yes, but internal security issues nonetheless. But in a case where one country is an aggressor against another country, in the case of Russia versus Israel, that's straightforward, twice international breach of the peace. But now, there are those who are arguing that the Palestinians don't even have an army. It's an unfair fight. It's basically one side carrying out a genocide on another side, on another set of on another country, as it were, and everyone seems to be folding their arms, and there is no outrage. So the question really is: has the world lost its morality? especially when it comes to sport?
That's a big question to answer on a Friday night. It is really interesting because obviously Israel's incursions into Palestine, and if we think also about the illegal settlements that we see in the West Bank as an example, there is a long history, there is a long track record of grounds for, I guess, the likes of UEFA, FIFA, and others to consider a suspension of Israel.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, Professor. I mean, some stadiums, some sports facilities built by Israel are built on Palestinian land that, ordinarily shouldn't be in Palestinian settlements. That's a clear breach of UN, UN resolutions, and nobody has said a single thing.
By the same token, you've obviously got clubs in Israel. If we take Beitar Jerusalem, for example, which is an avowed and very public anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, very racist football club, and yet no action has been taken against Beitar, and no action has been taken against the Israeli FA for not having dealt with that particular club. So there is a long running history of infractions and challenging behaviors coming out of Israel that you would imagine would in the context of current sensitivities have previously been dealt with. Russia, I think, is an interesting case because if we go back 10 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, pre the annexation of Crimea back in the early part of 2014, Russia was on side with the international community, and many Western leaders were, they were celebrating their relationships with Putin and Russia, and this was a reformed country. And even when Russia annexed Crimea, the likes of UEFA signed sponsorship deals with
they actually even held the FIFA World Cup.
They hosted the World Cup.
Absolutely, and they hosted the World Cup. So it does seem as though there is an inconsistency there. At least that's one thing that we can say. What we do know, I think, is that some within sports governing bodies, and keep in mind who we find inside sports governing bodies is they're not always entirely neutral individuals. So very often the people who serve inside sport governing bodies have connections to their states, to their governments. They have powerful connections sometimes to sponsors and commercial partners. And so they're not necessarily being entirely objective in the ways that they judge, for example, two different cases like Russia and Israel. And this again goes back to the point that I was making: is if we had very public, very transparent, very objectively prescribed standards of conduct and behaviour within governing bodies, we wouldn't be in the situation where we're having, on a show like this, trying to decide, is there moral equivalence between what Israel is doing and what Russia has done in the past. And so you've got to keep in mind, most sports governing bodies, most international sports governing bodies were set up by Europeans in the first part of the 20th century. We live in a world now where Europeans no longer dominate, and we also live in a world that is very, very different to the early 1920s. And so in my view, there in many cases across many governing bodies, there's a need for a root and branch reform, because the systems of governance that these organizations have really are not fit for purpose anymore in this very complicated and fractious and much changed world that we now live in.
Yeah, Prof, I don't want to go into the details of the politics involved in the Israel situation, because it's really deep-seated, and as you said, it's a long, history of disputes that dates several hundreds and hundreds of years. But I want to find out
thousands of years.
Thousands of years, actually. But then I'm worried that it looks like sports is not so sensitive. We do not understand that there are some issues that are so important, more than the sports that we do, which is the reason why we have sports going on, even when there are issues far beyond the sports that should draw the attention of those who are organizing competitions and putting all of these sports together, like the issue of Mexico that you talked about, and some of the other issues that you have highlighted. Do you feel that sports bodies should be a little bit more sensitive to other areas of life outside of the sports?
I have to say, somebody once said to me, "Would you want to be president of FIFA?" And I said, "No, I wouldn't." I mean, no matter what you do, no matter what you decide, as president of FIFA, somebody's going to hate you. I think what we have to be understanding of as observers and as fans, as commentators, is the likes of the IOC, FIFA, and many other governing bodies. This is a really, really difficult job. And if there are people out there who think they can do better, then they should get on and do it better, and they should make an attempt to do that. But by the same token, I do think that the interesting thing is obviously these governing bodies are populated at the highest level by elected officials, and very often what they are doing is to seek a mandate for future re-election, and so they're typically going to engage in what we might call populist measures. At the very least, they're going to engage in uncontroversial or non-controversial activities. And there is a discussion, I'm sure you're aware of this discussion out there, that there should be a difference between the executive, a clear distinction between the executive and whatever elected officials are part of the organization, because ultimately the argument is if you've got full-time officials, they're going to be making better decisions on behalf of the sport rather than decisions made by elected officials that are undertaken to garner votes. But I think we do live in a very, very complicated world. You know how it is. Kick a ball in the street. That's what sport is about.
Very, very true. Very true.
But obviously nowadays it's no longer like that.
Very true. Professor Simon Chadwick, it's been an honor and a pleasure having you on the show to discuss this particularly burning issue. We're very grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Game On. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.